All right. Good afternoon or good morning for those joining us from the other side of the Atlantic today. Welcome to the Transatlantic webinar on Smart City Solutions organized by SIBB in cooperation with Berlin Business Office located in New York City. My name is Marina and I work for SIBB as a project manager international business, and I have a pleasure to be your host today. For those who don't know us, we are a digital business association operating in Berlin-Brandenburg region, and our mission is not only to strengthen the region as a technology and innovation hub, but also to help our company members to develop new digital business opportunities regionally and internationally. Anyway, let me play a short introduction video in order to give you a better understanding of who we are and what we do. Okay, 1 second. All right, thank you very much for watching. As you saw it in the video, one of our international projects, Project Point Out, which is financed by Berlin Senate Partner for Economics. Pat, could you please switch off your camera? It's 1 second. Anyway, our Project Point Out, which is financed by Berlin Senate Department for Economics, Energy and Public Enterprises, has a primary focus on the American market. The main idea of our project is to create a platform for cooperation between the tech industry of German capital region and IT centers located on the east coast of the United States. Besides organization of regular networking transatlantic events like the one today, we are planning a business delegation to the east coast of United States next year at the end of March 2021. Obviously, our delegation depends on the further development of the pandemic, and the worst case scenario, we will be forced to postpone it one more time. It will be a third time, but please stay tuned. We'll keep you updated about our plans for the delegation, and if you have any additional questions related to our association, if you would like to discuss potential cooperation opportunities or simply join our delegation next year, please feel free to approach me during the networking session, join the SIBB table, and we can discuss it personally. At this point, I would like to give word to Pat Wilson, Commissioner of Georgia Department of Economic Development, which is a main sponsor of SIBB Forum International Business. Hello, Pat. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Marcina. Thanks so much. And I apologize that I jumped in too early there, but I think I was so excited that the technology worked that I
you couldn't wait.
The camera too early.
Yeah, pleasure to have you here. Okay, the stage is yours. You have your time for the presentation. I'll be on the background.
Terrific. Thank you, Marcina. It's great to be with all of you today, and thank you for joining us. It's an honor to sponsor this forum, and we thank SIBB for all the work that goes into organizing an event like this. My name's Pat Wilson, and I lead the Economic Development Office for the state of Georgia. So we help businesses of all sizes here in our state and around the world understand what Georgia has to offer them and help them succeed. We take companies from startup to growth, provide trade expansion expertise, and create entirely new ecosystems to support the innovation necessary for our businesses' continued success. What's important to note that all of our services are free and confidential. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the state of Georgia has an office in Europe and has since 1973. We cover continental Europe with a team based in Munich. Virginia Singevald is our business development manager specializing in e-mobility, innovative and smart technologies, and she and our entire team will be available to talk during the business networking session. So Georgia's been named the top state for business in the United States for 7 years in a row. And we believe that in addition to the hard assets we have here, we also have earned that title thanks to a relationship approach that we bring to economic development. A great example of that relationship approach is our Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, which is led by Deborah Lamb, who you'll hear from on the panel today. It's a first of its kind public-private partnership that will lead coordinated statewide efforts to encourage growth, entrepreneurship, and innovation across the state. Additionally, our department's 5 centers of innovation, which are targeted to help key industries in our state, is leading our smart cities effort along with many of the partners that have established government, education, industry, and philanthropy. The Centers of Innovation provide a great resource for everyone participating today as they work with our startups and provide our Georgia businesses with the connections and tools needed for success. An example of their work is the Ray Intelligent Highway, which is an 18-mile stretch of interstate and living laboratory that offers proving grounds for private industries and universities to test emerging technologies, such as connected and autonomous vehicles and lane change safety. Separately, the Georgia City of Peachtree Corners used their own assets, forming the Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners, which includes a 1.5-mile road and provides real-world test environment for companies and universities to test and validate new intelligent mobility and smart cities technologies in an urban setting. Finally, I'd like to introduce one of Georgia's top smart city innovation experts, Deborah Lamb, the managing director of Georgia Tech's Smart Cities and executive director of Georgia's Partnership for Inclusive Innovation. She will share her expertise on the panel shortly. Georgia Tech's Smart Cities program has 12 ongoing smart community projects across the state. Again, thank you for joining this program. I know Deborah is going to offer an incredible picture of Georgia, and we're confident that you'll find that Georgia's smart cities and complete approach to economic development will leave Georgia on your minds. Of course, there'll be a networking session after the presentation, so we invite you to stop by the Georgia table and say hello. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Pat, for this short introduction. And before I invite our international speakers to the stage, I would like to address a few organizational issues for today. The agenda for today's webinar is relatively simple. We'll kick off with an hour panel discussion with our expert, which will be followed by a Q&A session. Afterwards, we'll have a short pitching session of innovative products from smart city sector made in Poland and in Germany. And after this, we'll have a chance to move back to the virtual networking lounge to get to know each other, connect, and exchange our experiences. One more important thing, during the panel discussion, if you guys have any questions, please use the Q&A section, which is located on the upper right corner of your screen. And after the panel, me and the panel discussion moderator will make sure that we go through all of them and give you the answer. I think it's time to invite our speakers to the stage. I would start with the panel discussion moderator, Matthew DeCosin, who is a former sales director and business development executive at Techstars. Matthew, are you there? Awesome. How are you today?
Hello, Marcena. Thank you for the introduction. Good to be here. Thank you for hosting us, and excited for today's conversation.
Me too. I'm very excited and very curious about the international speakers, what they prepared for us today. I would like to invite Robert Mazur, founder of Smart City Works, Justin Robinson, Senior Vice President, Detroit Regional Partnership, Deborah Lamb, Managing Director, Smart Cities and Inclusive Innovation at Georgia Tech, Jonathan Lane, Assistant Vice President from New York City Economic Development Corporation, and at the end, the last speaker, Artu Tekir, CEO and founder of Urbanite Venture. Guys, please join me on the big stage. We're going to start the panel discussion, and I'm very curious about the final output. Okay. I think one person is missing. It's Robert. Robert, could you please join us? Okay.
Hold on. No.
Robert and Deborah from Georgia is missing. 1 second.
How do I get to the stage?
You are already here.
Oh, okay.
Deborah, I'm sending you the speaker invitation.
Okay.
Okay, guys, I will disappear from the screen. I will be on the background, and I will see you soon.
Thank you.
Enjoy the discussion.
All right. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you all again. Today's conversation is striking for a number of reasons. I was born in Detroit and I currently live in Berlin, and I see these as being two amazing cities that have, by the force of history, had to reinvent themselves. And I think today, within the context of the COVID crisis, all of us are looking at probably reinventing our personal lives, but we're certainly thinking about what does it mean to be part of a resilient community? What does it mean to be part of a resilient and thriving city? So I think, for today, particularly with the focus being on entrepreneurship and innovation, and we have some pitches later on by some amazing founders, I think it would be best to really make the most of our hour together to focus on, what are you noticing as experts on smart mobility and urban development in your particular communities within the context of Corona? And then I think after that, we'll go into more so speaking to what does this mean for entrepreneurs and founders who are trying to bring innovation to cities. So I think to begin, it would be great if we could start a brief introduction, kind of so everyone kind of knows a bit more about each of you and the community you serve and your expertise. And then we can take the conversation from there. So let's start with Arzu. Would you like to begin?
Good morning, everyone. I'm joining from Florida this afternoon. My company is Untitled Venture, is a growth consulting firm, actually. We help startups, urban tech companies, and their investors transform cities. Briefly, to companies solving urban problems, we are the independent advisor and business partner that brings new market opportunities, better relations with the cities, city administrations, and effective business development plans. And briefly, I can say that the startups reimagine the city and bring new solutions for urbanized needs. We bring resources, tools, and guidance to help business thrive.
Thank you very much, Arzu. Bob, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bob Mazur. I'm one of the founders of Smart City Works. We were created about 5 years ago with the recognition that there was not a lot of innovation, and particularly in the built environment. Structures were built essentially the same way and operated the same way they were 50, 60 years ago. And we knew that digitization would eventually creep into that market, into those built environments. So we established Smart City Works. We had our first partner was the Virginia Center for Innovative Technology. Subsequently, we won grants from the U.S. Economic Development Administration and are now working on a program with the state of Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia. Our programs we have an accelerator program. We bring 6 to 10 companies in twice a year. They stay with us for 3 months. We have built an ecosystem around. I'm in suburban Washington, D.C. So we have, as part of our ecosystem, most of the local governments in the region, particularly all the counties. And as part of that collaboration, we put pilots up throughout the region. We also have relationships all over the world, particularly within Europe with Horizon 2020, which we're going to establish a soft landing program here in the Washington, D.C. area for entrepreneurs from Europe. We have a similar program with the Israeli government, and looking forward to the discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Bob. Hand it over to Deborah.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here. I like Matthew's introduction. I was born in New York, currently live in Atlanta, but have lived in many parts of the U.S., including a few stints internationally. I did 2 stints in London and a few places throughout Asia. So it's really great to be back in terms of an international, global audience setting, but really call Georgia my home right now. And it's been really great to do smart cities and inclusive innovation here. We really think about how to harness community research partnerships and really try to improve the human condition and affect change in that regard, as well as empowering Georgia entities to do more on innovation pilots. And I am happy to share more about that later.
Deborah. Jonathan, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Jonathan Lin. I work at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which, for those unfamiliar, the NYC EDC, as we call it, is the City of New York's primary public sector engine for equitable economic growth and diversification for what is effectively the largest urban economy in the United States. At EDC, I oversee the Urban Tech NYC portfolio, which is an industry development portfolio that provides the right conditions, the right enabling infrastructure, and the right supports to help grow New York City's economy around the technologies and innovations that are modernizing and transforming urban systems. So thinking about connectivity, thinking about mobility and real estate, thinking about energy efficiency, food, waste, water, kind of the whole gamut of urban systems. We are interested in supporting those businesses and making sure that New York City is a place where they can grow, especially in light of the fact that, you know, there is really no place better for urban tech than the largest and most diverse urban environment in the United States. And that's kind of where the city is putting its investments to try to grow that economy.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Justin, my brother from another mother from Detroit. Go ahead.
Well, welcome everybody. Happy to be here today. I'm with the Detroit Regional Partnership. We are the regional economic development agency for the Detroit region. Obviously, a lot of our history is rooted in the automotive industry. And, you know, a lot of where our ecosystem spends time these days is looking into the future of how people, goods move, and really how the built environment needs to adapt to accommodate what this future will look like. And so while we have 20 global OEMs in Detroit, either headquartered or have their North American R&D centers, I think 96 of the top 100 auto suppliers are here, 60 of which are headquartered here. What we recognize is a lot of this innovation is coming from other places around the world, both traditional markets and non-traditional markets. And so we have a high interest in being a bridge to connect people with innovation back into our ecosystem to help us think what this future is going to look like. And so we have lots of tools and programs to do that. Happy to connect with anybody today via the discussion or offline, but you know, our mission is to help make our ecosystem smarter and drive forward the future of the way we all move and live within our communities.
Thank you, Justin. And with that, I think you brought up something really good about being a bridge. And I think now every major city realizes, you know, when you're thinking about being entrepreneurship, you're thinking about innovation, you're thinking about how do you change and adapt in a dynamic world, is that you can't just have a policy for your individual community or city. You have to have like a regional policy, and you also have to have a global outlook in a way, as you said, to build bridges. One thing that was touched on earlier when Jonathan was talking about the EDC in New York City, but this is also something that we spoke of during our prep time, was, you know, not everyone has access to high-speed internet. Not everyone has the luxury of perhaps working from home. And I think this feeds into about what kind of innovation we need, because we have vulnerable populations, we have marginalized populations. And when we think about resilient thriving community and city, how can we actually create and leverage technology and innovation and entrepreneurship to make sure that we really are able to provide the greatest good for the greatest number of people in our communities. And I think this will feed into what are the most potent avenues for the entrepreneurs and startups that are looking at creating new solutions for cities. So with that, I think it'd be great to hear from each of you on what you're noticing in the current kind of crisis of the pandemic, and in this sense of creating a resilient and thriving communities, and sense of what is just and equitable and resilient for the most number of people, and how do we get there through technology and urban innovation. So with that, maybe we'll start with the same order we did in introductions, and I'll go to Arzu to get her take.
Sorry, this is a very new virtual event experience for me. So let me explain. I mainly work with the startups and their investors, so I can start with the urban tech companies and how COVID affected the smart city investments in the cities. So afterwards, I want to continue how we can help these urban tech companies to develop better collaborations. So a month ago, I read a report published by S&P Global Market Intelligence. What I noticed, because during the conversations and speaking events, I am asked about all the panelists are asked about how COVID affected the smart city implementations. This report clearly states that in 2021, due to the COVID, in the United States cities, smart city implementations fall down to 7%, although in 2020, the expectation, in 2019, the expectation for the 2020 is projected to be up 14%. So it is really affected smart city investments and implementation, as far as I read from this report. On the other hand, the other thing is 5G implementations, 5G infrastructure implementations and developments, installations also a bit slowed down. So it affects also mitigating the digital divide, especially during this pandemic. So what I recommend for the urban tech companies who want to expand their businesses to other geographies, definitely this 2020 and next 12 months should be the focus on building new bridges, new partnerships, new collaborations. So instead of putting a lot of effort on the marketing and budgets on this areas marketing, I would highly recommend the urban tech companies focus on building new partnership in the United States. And also these are the development organizations are the great talking points and the institutions who get all the information and build this type of relationships. And also at Urbanite Venture, we do work with the European smart mobility companies, smart energy companies as well, and helping the investors. So this is my main approach when I am working with them to develop and restructure their business strategies and marketing strategies, focus on business development and build new partnerships, and also do a lot of digital networking, because all the venture capital firms, leaders, and also investors are at home at this point. So it is a good time to build relations, to nurture your business, to try your business in the near future. Expectations should be, projections should be focused on mostly 2021 will be the seeding phase, in my opinion.
Great, thank you, Arzu. Actually, I'm going to hop around a little bit now, because you mentioned something about infrastructure, and this is something I know that Deborah actually spoke to directly, of thinking about what's the kind of infrastructure that cities need. And I think maybe Deborah, if you want to, if I hand it off to you to get your take on like the resilience and thriving communities, and then what in terms of Atlanta and Georgia Tech, what you're seeing in terms of the priorities for on the infrastructure side.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, great question on infrastructure. And I do agree that there is a huge opportunity that Arjun talked about in terms of smart cities and that market. And you can go into any studies. It is going to be a huge billion-dollar plus industry. And I think that's why this webinar is so important for those that are interested in capturing some of those market shares, that this is a way that, you know, to be more competitive and to approach it. On the infrastructure, we define infrastructure as 3 levels. The first level is the traditional physical infrastructure. This is your roads, your transit, your highways, your bridges. You know, this is very clear in many minds, and it matches really well with our governance, right? In terms of a city, we know that at the end of the day, we have to fix potholes, we have to fix street lights. There is that physicality in terms of the built environment that's very clear. What's less clear is that the 2 more levels of infrastructure. The second level is the digital infrastructure, right? This is the virtual. This is what all the data is coming out. So you can put a sensor on a trash can, and that data is going into a digital infrastructure. And this is where we have less kind of framework on that digital infrastructure. Who owns that data? Who's using that data? How is it being applied? How is it being secured, stored, safe, etc.? And then the third and final infrastructure, which I think is the most important, and I think our fellow panelists would also agree, is the social infrastructure, which is how the people are going to interact with the digital and the physical infrastructure and that layer. And this is what makes smart cities so great in terms of that larger business. What is the framework in terms of trying to assess these 3 levels and layers of infrastructure and how we actually work together on that? And Commissioner Wilson talked very well about that. Here in Georgia, we have really thought to account for those 3 levers or layers of infrastructure and how best to create the partnerships or the framework to really optimize those 3 levels of infrastructure. Because, you know, we have the traditional physical infrastructure, and that's very clear, but the 2 other levels need to be accounted for, especially as we think about the aging and the changes of that physical infrastructure and the newness that comes with the digital infrastructure, and ultimately the unpredictedness that comes with people interacting with those 2 levels. And what we've done in Georgia is actually something that I think is important, and I think it's you know, Justin and Jonathan have also looked at it in New York and Detroit respectively, is we're very sensitive to the local context. Meaning we don't come in just with a solution and expect that solution to solve all our problems. You know, and I would caution this with the startups and our small businesses too. You know, you're really trying to work hand in hand, understanding the local context, and then understanding what is the possible solutions that you are co-creating with that local context in terms of trying to address the 3 levels or 3 layers of infrastructure. And I think that kind of process is going to be most optimal and most effective when you're trying to tap into the billion-dollar markets of smart cities that Azu and Bob, I'm sure, are very familiar as well. And so I think Atlanta and Georgia, with that kind of mindset, has really pushed forward on trying to optimize those levels.
Thank you, Deborah. When I was hearing you speak about, and I really liked your layout there of the physical, the digital, and the social infrastructures. And being a Detroit native, I think about the fact that Detroit's surprisingly a large city. It's about 140 square miles, if I'm not mistaken. And you could fit, I think, Manhattan, Boston, downtown Boston, and downtown San Francisco within its borders. It's quite a massive city that's going through this reimagining in, I think, a lot of ways. And there's quite some big projects underway. And so I'm curious, when Justin, when you think about the city of Detroit, and I think there's a lot of opportunity there for entrepreneurship and innovation given the scale of the city. And then also your own take on what you're seeing in terms of the resilience in Detroit in the current context.
Yeah, first, maybe speaking to the opportunities for, startups and innovation. I think the way our city and region is approaching this process is really looking at testing a lot of different solutions, right? I mean, there's not a one size fits all, right? We're still early in stage trying to understand what this future looks like. And so really where we've worked is an ecosystem to identify kind of specific challenges that are confronting everyday citizens, right? Kind of across a broad mix of things, whether it be, how somebody gets their child to school or, a senior citizen gets to healthcare. We really are thinking through what are the obstacles people and businesses are facing, and then how do we bring partnerships together between industry, government, universities, and startups to develop pilots to kind of test solutions. And so we've had dozens of examples of that, some with, our large companies like General Motors to companies like Lyft to a lot of startups from around the world. And the state's been pretty aggressive about putting grants out there to help fund that work, right? And so we use these pilots as learning lessons, always with the idea if something works, how do we scale beyond that? And so, right, I think that's our approach. We are working on some larger solutions. Our DOT is investing heavily in integrating our new roads with the latest communications technology, for future purposes. But a lot of this is going to be trial and error. And so that's the way we're approaching it. And I think that's a great way for early stage companies to get engaged. In terms of big picture, I think there's good news, right, and some bad news. I think the positive from our side, which is, always very focused on transportation, the future of transportation, our companies and industries are just as in as they ever were into driving towards this future, right? Whether that be around electrification, smart infrastructure. You can't have smart vehicles without smart cities, right? The two go hand in hand. And so from everybody we've talked to, they're just as committed as ever, and they still have the dollars committed to those efforts. In the shorter term, though, right, there's real challenges, and we see it in downtown Detroit. I think I shared in the pre-call, we're best maybe 20% of people back in the downtown environment, back to work in office buildings, right? And so I think we have to start to think a little bit about land use, right? And how do you use technology to think about place a little bit differently, think about how people may interact with that place in a different way, how you might utilize space that maybe isn't needed in the same way as it once was. And so a lot of that's early stage thinking, but I think that's another place that innovators can help with, right? And so lots of brainstorming happening in there, lots of discussions. And so that's another place early on we can plug people into the conversation.
Justin, you mentioned something there that's always been a curiosity of mine, and it kind of goes back to what Deborah was saying too around the layers of infrastructure. And I want to kind of hand it over to Bob to talk about this, because we talk a lot about smart infrastructures and smart vehicles interacting with smart infrastructure, but we're also starting, I think some of what you were saying is what's the kind of civic infrastructure that allows really for kind of like robust civic engagement and the participation in one's city. I think particularly now when you saw, Germany here is about on the brink of lockdown again, as is France, and things are escalating in the States. How might we think about infrastructure a bit differently when we're thinking about, in these kind of contexts, we're really trying to enable civic engagement as well. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, Bob. And you're on mute, Bob.
I think we're all learning day by day how this environment we live in is changing. And right now, I don't think we all know, even those who follow it closely, really how how things are going to change. I think the first issue everybody is trying to deal with is getting people back to work. And I think, as Justin said, what you said, 20% of your workforce is back. so you try to engage, and we've done this with both the cities and the commercial entities about what do you need to get back to work. And, you know, and to school, mind you. I mean, both of them are important. And what we're seeing is that the first and single most important issue for people to go back to work and go to school is health and hygiene. They need to feel safe. And, you know, since this is an evolving event, it's hard to do. And then when you get past that, you start to see that, you know, our public buildings, the buildings that people use every day, whether they be transport, airports, roads, anything in the process of being built, it has to be re-examined. And, you know, we're hearing from the community, not necessarily in a very organized way, but we're hearing that, you know, things are going to change. You know, are people going to be back to work full time ever? Or is it going to be part-time? And we have to take our, you know, physical infrastructure and adapt it to whatever the new world is. And that's not going to be so easy. You know, how many people are going to come through an airport? If you come through an airport, you have to do testing for health purposes. Where is that testing going to be in the confines of the space of an airport? People are going to get on, you know, here in Washington, the metro, our subway system, people are staying off of it. I mean, they're voting with their feet. They're scared. And we have to figure out how to get them not scared and adapt our structures to be meaningful to the people who use them, and get them back to using them. And that's going to be a real challenge. And then, you know, as far as entrepreneurs, and I think Matthew, you know, this whole discussion is about how do entrepreneurs adapt. What we see is entrepreneurs have technologies that have been basically designed for something else, and they pivoted it to use for dealing with some of the issues raised by COVID. And they're interacting with governments to the best they can, and I'm glad they are. But, you know, we're sort of all a little blind here. You know, as public interaction, you know, the pilots that everybody talked about are really important. We just, in Fairfax County, which is one of our partners, just started a pilot of an autonomous bus between Fairfax County, 2 points in Fairfax County. And people are trying it and they're seeing it. The one issue that I hope we don't get too deeply in, because it's a word that I don't like to use, which starts with a P, and I don't like the P word particularly, which stands for procurement, is a huge issue for all of us as we think through how to move, you know, Deborah's 3 layers. That's a real challenge, and I know people are thinking about it, but you know, it's a scary issue because every jurisdiction has a different approach to it, particularly in an area like Washington. Unlike, say, Atlanta, we have, you know, 30 or 40 governments within 20 miles of downtown Washington. Hugely complicated governmental infrastructure to deal with.
Thank you, Bob. You know, you brought up some key points there about, you know, talking about only 20% of the workforce potentially being back in offices. And I've heard stories from friends living in New York City, you know, around kind of like, you know, what Midtown looks like these days. And I'm really curious, Jonathan, like, you know, your work with the EDC, and particularly your mandate around protecting those and this, making access for people just and equitable. What are you seeing in New York, and what are some of the key things that the EDC is focused on?
Yeah, so city, I think, you know, we were the first city of its size in the United States to go through to go through a peak with COVID, but as I'm sure many people on this call will recognize, this is not the first time that New York City has been through a crisis, whether it's the attacks in the aftermath of September 11th, whether it's the 2008 Great Recession, whether it's Hurricane, Superstorm Sandy in 2012, and now COVID. I mean, I think this is a city that predicates itself on reinvention and resilience, in many cases by necessity. We have a pretty long arc of working around developing the tech sector here in New York City, approximately 12 years, kind of starting with the Great Recession and an effort to diversify our economic base. But I think what we are seeing now more than ever is it's not just tech for tech's sake. It's not just tech solutions that add any digital layer to existing processes, but tech that really, truly, meaningfully addresses the city's top line policy priorities. And I think that's never been more true than in this moment. In New York City, I think one thing that we're seeing, and this is a subtext of what all of the other panelists have already mentioned, but one thing is that it is not business as usual. In some of the pitch decks that I've seen since then, and I've worked with pitch decks on the private sector venture capital side of things, and on the public sector side, in as much as we're trying to develop the urban tech economy. I don't know if that point has fully sunk in, and I think Bob was kind of alluding to this as well. But it is not business as usual. So full stop. I think that's something that should sink in. The second thing is, I think what we saw even before COVID hit is that the smart cities and urban tech sector had spent a whole lot of time thinking about how to make cities smarter, but probably not nearly enough time around making cities stronger and more resilient. So I think, if you think about health resiliency, which is one of the foremost pillars of Mayor de Blasio's recently announced long-term economic recovery, and something that Bob, I think, very astutely mentioned as like being the building block of anything, any way of recovering our economies in the future. It's thinking about how we can increase our capacity to address this and future health crises, to safely reopen offices, to safely use public transportation, which is critical as the backbone of New York City's economy and as a way of equitably connecting jobs with those who need jobs. I think it's also about climate resiliency and using our scale to mitigate and prepare for one of our city's other existential threats. It's about digital resiliency, kind of in part what Deborah mentioned. How do we make sure that small businesses can weather the storm when foot traffic is no longer possible, or when in-office and in-classroom environments are no longer safe? And it's thinking about production and supply chain resiliency. How do we ensure that supply chains and manufacturers that provide the goods that keep our city running are secure and resilient and can bend without breaking, maybe while providing economic recovery opportunities in the process? So I think those are kind of key areas that we are thinking a lot about: health, climate, supply chains and manufacturing, digital resiliency. But then I think a third piece that's important to mention is, again, with all of this thinking around how to make cities smarter, we also probably have not spent nearly enough time thinking about how to make cities more equitable and just. And I think especially for those startups that are, tuning in from Berlin or Florianopolis or otherwise outside of the United States, I think it's really important to understand the historical context of the United States. I know back in, June of this year, there were also some protests in Berlin with regard to racial justice. So that's something that is, I think, beginning to surface in Germany as well. But on our side, understanding that context and recognizing that tech has not always been the best sector at addressing questions around equity and inclusion, I think it's really important to study up on that context, because when you come here to do business, it's, at least in one sense, it's about avoiding, you don't want to make the problem worse. But it's also something that, as far as a business development opportunity, that businesses and government agencies will actively look for. It is a very top of mind conversation. And I think studying up on that piece, understanding what the inequities are and how different solutions can address that, I think is linchpin.
Thank you, Jonathan. You covered a number of things there. You know, what are these critical kind of elements that really lead to a resilient city, and certainly what you said, the most vulnerable populations, those who are most marginalized. And again, I think this piece of like almost starts going into government tech and you know, what's the infrastructure that really provides equitable access for meaningful civic engagement, so people have an equal voice in what their cities look like, the creation of their cities, the future of their cities. And when you think about, you know, you mentioned this idea of the linchpin, and I think this is where we can start, you know, turning the conversation as we start to get towards the end of our panel of like, what are the things that, you know, that entrepreneurs and founders really need to focus on in terms of being linchpin type organizations, and not, as you said, just being smart. We need more than just smart cities. We need resilient cities. We need engaged cities. We need healthy cities. We need ways to make sure that our supply chains, our health, and our small, medium businesses aren't devastated by the current crisis. And so with that, you know, I want to hand it over to each of you to kind of discuss what's your advice for those who want to do a pilot, test out some technology, get engaged with cities. What would you recommend? And I think I'll start off with Deborah in the city of Atlanta.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what our other panelists have said in terms of the approach. Obviously, you're coming at it in terms of a co-creation mindset, and you're coming at it with a mindset that, you know, under this pandemic cloud, when you come back, you're not going back to business as usual. In fact, you shouldn't go back to business as usual, because we just outlined, you know, business as usual wasn't the best path to go. But if you're not going back to business as usual, what is that series of options or alternatives? And there's a certain amount of flexibility that needs to happen. And I think Justin talked about really well with placemaking, right? The way that we see our place in our space needs to be flexible as much as the way that we think about operationalizing, you know, that process and being at that individual level. So what I would say for those that are interested in coming to Georgia, and we have a great team led by Commissioner Wilson in economic development that I think is very welcoming and provides a lot of support. But one of the things that I think is most critical in that support is that social infrastructure, you know, that people. Ultimately, when you're coming into a place where you're not as familiar with that place, where you're not as familiar with that local context, when you are open and there are people that want to share and have some common goals, right? Ultimately, there are so many changes and disruptions, and that's kind of inevitable. But I don't think the common goals of place and cities are going to change. There are common kind of drivers in terms of improving the quality of life, improving the human condition, improving the built environment. Those are common alignments that will never shift despite whatever challenge comes at us. And when you have those kind of common goals and you go into a place with people and groups and localities that are interested in that alignment with you and willing to co-create with you, I think that is a recipe for really exciting things to come.
Thank you, Deborah. Justin, you mentioned that the city of Detroit is pretty bullish on pilots and testing. And then what's your advice for entrepreneurs that are interested in getting engaged with the city of Detroit?
Yeah, I mean, I think start the conversation, right? And we can be a gateway for that. We're not the only person you need to talk to, but we're happy to help you figure that out. So reach out. I think Jonathan and Deborah just both hit on a couple key points, and you alluded to it too, Matthew. You know, companies may have some great innovation and some great technology, but they need to understand the customer's problem, and it's evolving, right? And so I think in that approach, yes, be ready to talk to your capabilities, but you don't yet maybe understand how they could get applied by that person you're talking to. So, you know, I think that co-creation piece Deborah spoke to is right on. I mean, it needs to be a discussion. And then ultimately, right, you need partners, right? And so I think the more you understand about the other people you might want to bring to the table, as well as asking us who on our side might be, you know, the other half of the coin, right, or mix of people we can bring to the table. That's key, especially in our infrastructure. I mean, a lot of this doesn't cost out, right, as a pure business proposition. You need money from government, from universities, from philanthropic organizations at times to make this happen. And those other pieces, especially in the social equity piece, in our market, that's how we're moving those challenges forward. We need the dollars from those other stakeholders to make these things work, because on paper, right, otherwise they don't. And so I think that's really important as well.
Great, thank you, Justin. You touched on something there, and it's been another theme that's been woven through in and out of our conversation, is the importance of an ecosystem and partnerships. I know from what I've seen of the EDC's work in the city of New York that you certainly gain points and you certainly get a lot more access if you are collaborating with other parties. And I think a lot of times the EDC's funding certainly emphasizes this piece of partnerships and collaboration. Jonathan, do you want to speak about that in terms of, you know, for the founders who are entrepreneurs that are joining us today, you know, how the EDC thinks about that in terms of getting engaged with the city for like a pilot or a test, or, you know, doing something in the city of New York?
Sure. I mean, I think the points that I touched on, I think are, they certainly encapsulate a lot of that in terms of, you know, throw away the pitch deck that you were using before COVID, have to maybe start from scratch. And then the points around resilience and around, to Deborah's point, around social infrastructure and understanding racial justice as kind of a broader history within the United States. I think in terms of, you know, whether it's getting engaged in piloting opportunities or addressing immediate COVID needs. I mean, one thing that the EDC launched recently is called Neighborhood Challenge, right? Neighborhoodchallenge.nyc. That is a way for those that have ideas, right? We recognize that we as a city cannot do everything ourselves. Full stop. The public sector is not equipped to go it alone. One of the beautiful things about Neighborhood Challenge is it is a crowd ideas from those people that say, oh, the city should be doing X, or, you know, if only real estate companies were doing Y. It's a way of crowdsourcing those ideas, but also providing the, you know, in a two-sided market, those that actually need the ideas, aka small businesses, aka restaurants, retail, that are struggling with these issues. It's a way of providing the connective tissue between those that have ideas and those that need ideas. I think that's really fundamental to the role that EDC plays in this kind of partnership model. Is we aren't necessarily trying to, you know, inject ourselves into every conversation and do things ourselves. It's about how do we connect the academic institutions with the community-based organizations, with the venture capital firms, with the corporates and incumbents, you know, those that have ideas, those that need ideas, and then kind of using the filter for that connective tissue as, you know, what are our top line policy priorities? What is it that we actually want to accomplish here? That's, I think, fundamental to the model that we see for, you know, trying to foster an inclusive, equitable, and in some ways kind of decentralized recovery. You know, we worked closely. One of the things that we've been doing for a long time is working to support our manufacturing sector in particular, thinking about ways that we can bolster advanced manufacturing in New York City. And at the peak of the COVID crisis, because we had all of this kind of deep work and expertise in manufacturing and with fashion manufacturers and advanced manufacturers, we were able to pull together local supply chains to address shortages of personal protective equipment, PPE, including ventilators, including face shields, including isolation gowns. And I think, you know, it's not necessarily about us being the manufacturers. It's about knowing who the right people are to bring together and make connections, develop partnerships. And in as much as we can foster that kind of collaboration and make sure that those that have complementary resources can get connected to each other, I think that's really the way that we see our role in ecosystem building. And like I said, providing that filter around what are the public policy priorities, be it racial and social justice, be it sustainability and climate resilience, be it connectivity and digital resilience, you know, creating the connective tissue, but providing the filtering layer in between.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think I heard a virtual sigh from all the entrepreneurs when you said, throw away your pitch decks. It's no longer business as usual. You know, I think you have to be willing to be daring and to perhaps reinvent yourself, but also think outside the box in terms of new constellations of collaboration. You know, it makes me think of kind of like a wartime economy where we've seen this, right? Factories are repurposed to make corona, you know, masks for COVID. New constellations of creativity and industry come together that did not simply exist before. And entrepreneurs have to be willing to kind of forge those maybe unexpected partnerships and collaborations to create new constellations of creativity and products and ways to redesign and re-engage our cities in ways that may have never been anticipated before. I want to be sensitive to our time here. I also want to ask those of our viewers to notice that there is a sidebar with Q&A. We'll try to get to a couple of those questions. If there is something that you really want to know from our panelists, two things. Put your question in there, but there's also the ability to upvote the questions that are there so we can see if we can answer one or two of those. So we've heard a lot from Deborah, Jonathan, and Justin from, you know, respectively from Atlanta, New York City, and Detroit. I want to return to Bob and see if you have any parting words here for the entrepreneurs who may be listening here, given what Jonathan just shared.
Sure. One thing that we haven't discussed, which has always been a problem in bringing new technologies to urban environments, Jonathan just touched on it, is financing. How do we finance these projects? And we've talked about collaboration. Unfortunately, at least in my area, and I suspect in your areas, local governments' budgets have been slammed as a result of COVID, and we need to recognize that. They have declining tax revenues because people aren't working, and their rise in needs for basic human needs for the city to take care of. And to be frank, you know, if somebody's hungry or somebody needs a place to live, that's going to come first before what, you know, a lot of the stuff that we care so much about, where the nice to have is going to be outdone by the need to have almost every day. And these jurisdictions are challenged today. So we need to be really creative. One of the things I've looked for previously is to understand sort of the value chain in a very detailed way of how projects get funded, and to see if you can find a champion within the funding value chain. So, you know, we have municipal bonds, and that's really a city type of, you know, that's a city project. You know, couldn't come out of the city budgets, but with the city budgets being slammed the way they are, that's going to be really hard right now. PPPs, though, are sort of interesting. there's huge amounts of money, private equity money, sitting out there looking to invest in PPPs. And unlike in Europe, where you've been using PPPs for a fairly long period of time successfully, we sort of have a hodgepodge of success here in the U.S. So there's a bank, an investment bank near us that all they do is sustainability projects. So they look to use future revenues to pay for projects needed today. And I would really focus on trying to get to know what those projects are, because those are the ones most likely to be funded in a community. And then we'll see, what happens to, the budgets of these organizations, these governmental organizations in the future. I think in the United States, we have a decent chance to see a infrastructure bill out of the next Congress. And that might, there are some devices that they're talking about that might help here. But, if I was an entrepreneur, I'd be looking at every possible way to see how, if I'm providing a public good, how is that going to get funded? And sort of, track that down and make friends within that value chain.
Yeah, it's we're almost thinking of kind of like the New Deal, right? Will this be like the New Deal of our era to in fact inject kind of, I think, not only money into the economy, but also to work on some of that critical infrastructure and open up new lanes of opportunity for entrepreneurship and innovation. You touched on a couple of things there: public-private partnerships, and where are the funding channels? Where are those funding lanes? And I know, Arzu, this is one of your fields of expertise here in terms of partnerships and funding. What is your advice for entrepreneurs going into this context?
Yeah, Bob touched the PPP models. I was also thinking to explain about this. PPP will be much more important in upcoming years because COVID hit the municipalities' budget. So cities, the municipalities have managerial challenges, political challenges, and also financial challenges when we talk about the smart city projects. So entrepreneurs, also big urban tech companies or technology companies, also should think about developing new business models. For instance, smart city as a service. We will be hearing much more about this terminology, smart city as a service. So upfront cost maybe at this point will be lower compared to previous year. So entrepreneurs should work with their investors and advisory boards and board members to develop better business model to be able to collaborate with the municipalities. On the other hand, I also recommend the entrepreneurs to start with the small cities. Some startups are so eager to start with the big cities like New York and Paris and other, Istanbul, for instance. These type of big cities are so complex to work in. Now, there are a lot of bureaucracy, there are a lot of financial, structure and very complex areas to do some pilots and to do some projects in the city. So instead of doing that, especially for the European startups, start with the smaller cities in the United States by building new collaborations. As far as I see, procurement processes will be much complex in 2021. So that's why I am highly recommend the startups to develop new collaborations with the different urban tech companies in the United States. Also definitely should contact with this EDC representatives here. So this is the most important part to build some collaborations. Since I'm coming from Europe, actually 3 years ago, I moved to Florida from Istanbul and worked with the European Union cities and developed some European Union projects through European Union funds. I would also say that, I would love to say that, these European Union funds structures were really helpful for the European cities to advance in smart city implementations and smart city development. So because the cities and startups and institutions work together and learn from each other in a very, compared to other countries, in a very short amount of time. So that's why many problems the other countries, other cities has been facing at this moment in terms of managerial and political and regulatory challenges are already solved in the European Union cities. Maybe Justin, Jonathan, Deborah, and Bob also should think about this, developing better collaborations with the European Union countries. What I see when I work with the European Union startups to raise funding through European Union funds, for instance, Green Deal, Horizon 2020, it is so helpful for them to start pilot projects. But when I communicate with some US-based startups, it's not so easy. Maybe these two countries and platforms should develop better collaborations. Maybe you can facilitate these conversations with the European Commission as well. So especially for the US-based startups and the companies are only accepted for the deployment phase of the project. So maybe the structure should also be changed. And Jonathan also touched equity and inclusion. I really value these areas as well, since my vision is smarter, livable, lovable cities for all. So to be able to create this smarter, livable, lovable cities for all, not the privileged ones, the startups also should think about more and more social and environmental KPIs. And the other thing for the investors, if there is an investor in our venture capital firm, representatives in our webinar, the profit making is, behind COVID at this moment. So instead of focusing on just profit and scaling up very fast, I think business as usual, as Deborah said, need to be changed as well, because at this moment we are facing with the COVID crisis, economic crisis, climate crisis as well. On top of that, there is a huge migration from the conflicted zones to developed countries and developing cities. So this is a big burden on the cities at this moment. The other thing is, social injustice is another issue the cities need to think about and need to solve this as soon as possible to be able to create, make the cities smarter. What else I can add is, on the other hand, and the other thing I want to share it, communication is very key. What I see at the city administrations, they are not able to keep up with the developments on the technology side. So they need to build capacity as soon as possible. I don't see a lot of structures and opportunities for the US municipality leaders and officers. I know that Bloomberg Philanthropy is doing a lot of great job on this matter, but there also need to be developed this type of structure to build the capacity in the United States, state administration. And entrepreneurs and also cities also should focus on the communication part, educate the citizens to be able to create behavioral change. When we think about energy consumption reduction and implementing the resilience plans or climate change plans, definitely we need to citizens buy-in. So to be able to do that, we need to educate them. So communication is very important part as well. All these things requires funding, I know that. So since I am helping to urban tech companies, mainly the venture capital firms, and also we work with the European Union funds at this moment.
Thank you, Arzu. So for those founders and entrepreneurs that are in our audience today, there is no shortage of issues to be tackled. There is no shortage of opportunities to collaborate across multiple levels of governance. But the good news is that there's no shortage of super connectors and I think enabling organizations out there, right? Almost, every city has their economic development corporation. Obviously, today we're being hosted by SIBB, who's also working in collaboration with Berlin Partner. I would say the good thing is a lot of these relationships are already there, right? You know, the EDCs of these communities have a relationship with people in your community. Especially if you're in a major city, it doesn't matter which major city that might be in Europe, those relationships are there. And in these major cities, you just have to figure out, you know, who's the equivalent of your EDC, your SIBB, your Berlin Partner, and they have those relationships that you can start mapping out. You know, who are the players, who are the ecosystems that I want to, and then how can I get engaged? How can I throw away my old pitch deck, not do business as usual, and find the right people and the avenues for collaboration and the new opportunities that are coming out at different levels of government funding, public-private partnerships, to actually build what's going to be the future of our resilient and thriving and creative cities. I think there's lots of possibility out there. We only have probably time for, I think, maybe one question here. And this kind of gets at something that's been a theme throughout our conversation. And I'll read it off here. As inequality has risen sharply in the last decade, this means communities have a bigger span of socioeconomic groups. How can we bridge this gap and create sustainable urban development? And I think, does anyone feel like a burning desire to tackle that question? Because I don't know if we need to go through around the horn again, but does someone want to, I think, Jonathan, I think you're shaking your head there. Is that a saying you'd like to answer that?
Yes. I mean, I think it's essential question for anyone to put into a soundbite on a panel like this. I think maybe the first step is people like me or like us not being the only people to answer that question. Like, I think that there is one of the missing links is that, you know, within city government, like public sector or nonprofits, or increasingly private sector, kind of sees itself as the arbiter of interest between different groups. I think in a lot of cases, trying to provide the right infrastructure for groups to speak for themselves and answer that question for what a sustainable future looks like for their neighborhood, incredibly important. So in part, I will punt. I think the other piece of it is in recognizing, I think a lot of startups have been incentivized to think about, you know, what is the sexiest technology, whether it's AI or ML or cybersecurity or IoT or blockchain, whatever it is, and somehow that creeps its way into the pitch deck because, you know, that's what VCs are looking for, and so we kind of like design everything around that. I think the gap, the digital divide, as it were, requires stepping back and looking at what are the baseline things that are missing, right? So, and Deborah kind of mentioned this, and we also talked about it in the prep. It's about, you know, if you're using an AI or ML or whatever kind of like whatever the latest and greatest thing on the hype curve happens to be, you have to take a step back and think about, does everyone have broadband connectivity? Does everybody have the basic infrastructure that's necessary in order to use these things? Because if we're only designing solutions at the most sophisticated technical engineering side of things, there are a lot of things that are happening right now, a lot of needs that are low tech, right? Use innovation with regard to open streets and open restaurants and open retail. There's not a lot of technological risk involved in this. So I think as startups thinking about, you know, not necessarily overthinking and overbuilding a solution that may require something that is not sophisticated, but is simple, affordable, and effective, to me is another kind of answer to that question, in addition to making sure that community voices are centered in ways that, you know, a technocratic approach, I think, may have missed in the past.
I would add a couple.
Jonathan, yeah, massive question. Deborah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would say for the startups out there, I would really, if you are lucky enough to be thinking about hiring, think about hiring some more diverse experiences and voices and degrees to your startup organization. I think those additional voices, actually, it's not just diversity for diversity's sake, it actually will make your product or service stronger in terms of kind of looking at the many different facets. And so I think that's an important component. And I'm thinking of this even from a technical engineering school, right? We turn out a lot of engineers and they're great, but an engineer will have an engineering solution. A computer scientist will have a computing solution. And that's a very narrow kind of solution. But if you kind of have that multidisciplinary background or diverse experiences, I think it really does have that iterative product development that will make it stronger. The other thing I would add is just, again, from the university perspective, something that we even looked at is that we just have to start earlier, right? We kind of traditionally thought, oh, we are only focused on the collegiate level and maybe at the high school level. But by the time you hit the high school level or the secondary level for our European audience, it's a little bit too late. You really have to start earlier in the conversation to think about the social economic divide. And then the final thing I would add is Bob touched upon the financing aspect in terms of the capital, but the other aspect to all this is the social capital. You know, who do you know in your network and who is part of your network that can get the advice, that can get the initial starting, loans and assets. And I think for a lot of this is if you're already fortunate in a strong social capital base to get that initial loan or to know somebody who knows somebody, then you're already further ahead. There are some of these startups and groups that might not have that social capital, and it's up to all of us to think about how to widen that social capital access so that they can make those pitches and be connected to those that can provide the strategic advice in order for them to succeed.
Right. Thank you so much, Deborah. Yes, and in the name of that, in terms of the social capital and giving people a leg up in terms of building those partnerships, getting access to those networks, all of us on the panel will put together some resources that we'll share with SIBB that can be shared with the audience for those entrepreneurs who want to follow up and get access, get in touch. We'll be happy to share those resources. Thank you to our esteemed panelists. It was a pleasure to be to moderate and be in conversation together. I feel like we could have easily have gone for 2 or 3 times the amount of time we were allotted because it's such a rich and meaningful conversation. So thank you for each of your thoughtfulness and the leadership you brought to the conversation. Now we will go into the startup pitches, and then after that we'll have some open networking time, and I'm looking forward to seeing everyone during that time. And then I believe now Marzena is going to come back and hand it off to the pitches. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Matthew, for the moderation, and thank you guys for your smart contribution to the discussion. As Matthew mentioned, it's time to actually get to know innovative solutions which can potentially facilitate development of smart cities. At this point, I would like to invite our first pitching company, Barend Smets, co-founder and CFO of Taumatek. It's an IoT solution for smart cities made in Poland, but I'm sure Barend can tell us more about it. Hello, Barend.
Hi, Marzena. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thank you very much for the introduction.
My pleasure. The stage is yours. Bob, you just need to switch off your camera. Click on the camera symbol. Okay, thank you so much. The stage is yours, Barend. I'll be back soon.
So, okay, I'm trying this out. Hopefully, can you see my presentation? Just checking.
Yes.
Hello, Marzena. Marzena, can you see my presentation?
No, unfortunately not. You are sharing. Oh yes, now I can see your presentation.
Great. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you very much for this invitation and this great event. My name is Byron Smet, one of the co-founders of the Untitled Tech Group. We're a group of companies that specialize in Internet of Things and artificial intelligence projects. Did many smart city projects, and I just want to highlight a couple of them and bring you through, our experiences. Before I do that, I just want to frame it a little bit. When we talk about smart cities, what kind of projects are we talking about? And I'd like to use this definition of the Smart City Index. Actually, so congratulations on New York and Washington, because they improved their ranking tremendously in 2020 compared to 2019. I think they went to place number 10 and number 12. So congratulations on that. But actually, the definition says, an urban setting that applies technology to enhance the benefit and diminish the shortcomings of urbanizations for its citizens. And it looks at 5 areas: health and safety, mobility, activities like cultural activities and so on in the city, opportunities, which is schooling, education, and governance. And so that's a very diverse field and a very many different projects, big, small, that actually fit that those 5 areas. And I already want to give you some takeaways from our experiences, and I've heard it from the panelists as well. It's very good to realize that every city is different, and they kind of maybe have similar problems, but every city is different. So local know-how is crucial. That's from our experience from working with different cities. You cannot just do that with one approach. Every city needs to be approached and has its own priorities. On the other hand, experiences from other cities and other industries is super valuable. Yeah. So to make sure that you make a maximum out of what other cities have already discovered. And thirdly is that, start small, start POCs, gather data, and then define data strategy. Because of course, a lot of projects stand by themselves, but in the end, the real value is when you integrate them in the whole ecosystem. So what people forget to do is, have a data strategy for all these smart solutions that you're implementing, and then be able to, when it is successful, to scale fast. And I've heard it also from the panelists, and that's how we look at it. This can only be done in partnerships. And then we are looking for partners in cities which we can support with either their products or their solutions or their approach, and then basically help them scale very fast. So just a very short overview of some of the projects that we did that we regard as projects for smart cities. One is a smart safety watch. So basically, for safety smartwatch, based on a general smartwatch, we developed a solution where cleaners of public spaces who, now and then have problems with harassment could give a silent alarm to security control room. And they could do it just by tapping their finger on the watch. So nobody knew that they were giving an alarm. And then this control room could give a signal back, which resulted in the vibration of this smartwatch that help was on the way. This would avoid the fact that there would be an escalation of the harassment because people knew that there was an alarm given. This is one of that fits perfectly in, how can we increase public safety, and especially for people working in public safety, without having this escalation. The other thing that we are working on, and I think, how does COVID impact our projects? Well, this is a perfect project that is getting accelerated now, and it's too bad it's not on the market yet, which is a wristband which measures vital health parameters of especially elderly people. And it's targeted so that elderly people can stay at home for a longer period, can be monitored from a distance, where doctors can see at the history of certain parameters, but also, plan interventions from a distance, and that people that take care of these elderly people at home do not have to spend time when they visit in getting these parameters, but can spend time also on, really interaction with elderly people, and therefore reducing tremendously also the health cost and improving the situation of elderly people, because they can stay in their environment for much longer. And this, with COVID, we all know that this is a perfect product that shows how you can use smart healthcare in improving the quality of people that are isolated at the moment. And then maybe last, a little bit an overview of that, maybe the classical smart city initiatives that we've been engaged with. In the city of Wrocław here in Poland, we actually have built our own network of LoRa, which it wasn't there, so we built it ourselves together with the city on the roofs of city buildings, on the roof of the university buildings, so that we could experiment with a lot of smart city initiatives like smart parking solution for the tourist buses, localization services, water level monitoring, trash can monitoring. And those are projects that are either with the city or there are other smart city startups from Wrocław that just want to use our network, our communication network. And we've put it open for everybody who wants to do R&D, so that we can get a lot of these initiatives kick-started, get the results, get the data, and then we develop further, because then you have also a better proposition towards the city because you already have results and not just from a PowerPoint. So these are just the highlights I would like to do from smart cities. If you want to learn more, you know, I'm available later on in one of the rooms. And like I said, for us, it's partnership, partnership, partnership. You cannot do it alone, in our opinion. And we would looking forward to, you know, maybe talk about some partnerships in one of the cities that you represent. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian, for your short presentation. The time is running very fast, so I would like to jump into the second presentation right away. And at this point, I would like to invite Lorena Soto Casanova from Smart City System to tell us more about the product and potential plans for the American market in the future. Hello, Lorena. The stage is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. And there we go. Hi, everybody. I'm Lorena from Smart City System. Thank you for having me. And to start out, actually, I would like to ask you guys a question. So what is that one thing that you and I battle with on a daily basis, that which actually eludes almost every city in the world? From the moment I go out the door, you know, will I find a parking space? Will I get a spot without search, without the frustration, without the waste of my time and money? Like, why can't my phone just tell me what to do as it does everything else? So, but in the US, actually, there's an average of about 8 parking spots for every car. And at least the last statistics were that the smart parking market in the US is actually growing by 1.4 billion in the next 5 years, that the US will actually become one of the biggest smart parking markets in the world. And in the US, after the study was done, and there was the answer that, you know, the populace actually wants real-time parking availability, and they want direct navigation to open parking spots, and they want this information at their fingertips. So what is the problem? And it's not that there's a lack of parking, but there's actually a lack of information. And so, enter Smart City System. We have a sensor. It's called a parking pilot sensor, and it instantly digitizes parking areas with a completely wireless sensor. And so it's very simple. We put it in each space, a car drives over it, and the occupancy information is available to any app or any software. So direct navigation for peace of mind, more effective control of each space for direct, increased income, data analytics for better understanding of the use of the parking areas that we already have, and for further planning for the cities. And of course, in a more company level, secure parking spots for employees or for guests, starting the day off right. No? So all this information is at your fingertips. And actually, we're already working in Europe with the biggest communication provider, Vodafone. We've teamed up with them, and together we've created citywide initiatives for digitizing parking areas, and generated millions of revenue in the process. And Abcoa, it's the largest parking management company in Europe, is working with us to digitize their parking areas to work more efficiently in their management and increase profits using this real-time parking data that the sensors deliver. This is a quick overview of who we are, and that's we are Smart City System. We do hope to bring these smart parking solutions to every city. There are various solutions, not just the ones we touched upon, but they're ever expanding and ever evolving, as we mentioned before, as we work with more and more cities nationally, and then hopefully also internationally. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Lorena, for the short introduction. It's time for another pitch, a very interesting product from Aerospace. At this point, I would like to invite Sven Przewara, a co-founder of Live.io, based in Berlin. Hello, Sven, are you there?
Yes, exactly, I'm there. Hi.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for joining us today. I'm gonna leave you, and
Yeah.
like.
Perfect, great. Yeah, I'm gonna share my screen. You should be able to see my presentation now. So what we do is a little bit more adjacent to really like inner city and urban, right, core city technology. What we do is we do infrastructure monitoring from space. And in one sentence, we bring Earth observation to enterprises and to cities, to municipalities, cooperatives in Europe as well as in the United States. Imagine that you're sitting at home and suddenly the lights turn out. One of the reasons for this, and often one of the most, and even one of the most probable causes of such a power outage, is an external threat caused by vegetation and a tree which fell onto an overhead line, especially in the US, where most of electricity is provided by overhead lines. Vegetation is a major problem. And not only because power outages can happen, but also wildfires and other events, catastrophic events can happen, as we currently have seen it in Colorado or California. And so more than $6 billion are spent every single year on vegetation management in the United States. And this is done relatively inefficient. Why? Because it's just an incredible task to monitor and maintain hundreds, thousands of miles of overhead lines. In total, there are more than 40 million kilometers of pipelines, electrical grids, and railway systems on the entire globe. And these are currently maintained either by foot patrol, by cars, by helicopters. And really, now we have this unique technology, satellites monitoring the entire globe at a recurring basis. And we use this. And we use the fact that the Earth is becoming digital. And we translate satellite data into actionable insights for utilities, for municipalities, for cooperatives. And we help them with identifying, for example, where vegetation is a threat, where, for example, underground movements or historic mining sites can lead to structural problems with bridges, with streets, with houses, or we can help also with keeping the integrity, with keeping up the integrity of pipelines, with monitoring if someone is building something in the right of way of a pipeline. And we're breaking this information really down onto an operational level, which helps people in the field to actively maintain these infrastructure grids by providing them with a web app, a mobile app, integrations into, for example, smart city systems from SAP, Infor, and so on. Now, with all of this, cities and utilities can save up to 60% of their vegetation management cost, for example. And really, our goal is to translate Earth observation for utilities as part of this bigger picture. And so, because the US is such an important market, and because infrastructure grids are so important in themselves for our daily life, we have looked at the US during the last year. We have been part of the German Accelerator Program, which is a great initiative, also present here, and we've been have had offices in Silicon Valley, and earlier this year on the East Coast until COVID made this difficult. But we're looking out to expand into the US next year, more on the east side of the country, so Eastern time zone or Central time zone for logistical reasons. And we're right now really actively scouting to have a look where next year we want to have a small sales team. So at Live.io, we have one big mission, which is monitoring every major infrastructure grid on the globe with AI. And the great thing about satellite data is that we don't have any regional or country borders, and it really, with this technology, we can help to maintain infrastructure grids more efficiently and to make power supply more resilient against external threats. Thanks.
Amazing. Thank you, Sven, for this journey into space. At this point, it's time for our last speech for today. I would like to invite Ray from Early. Ray, are you here with us today? Now it's time to talk about the air quality, right?
Yeah. Hi guys. I'll try and make this quick. I know I know our time is kind of taken down here, so I'm just. And cool. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
Okay, so hi, my name is Ray Cacavelli. I work for Airly. We are a Poland-based air quality tech company. We're responsible for making hyper-accurate and affordable air quality sensors. We believe that the biggest problem facing the future of smart cities is the fluidity and accessibility of information, specifically information supporting community health. Improving the flow and accessibility of potentially life-saving air quality information will help improve the digital, physical, social, and economic functionality of smart cities. Our devices monitor concentrations of the 6 criteria pollutants listed most dangerous to human health by the US EPA and American Lung Association. Our devices relay that data directly to our API and customers' mobile application, where they can see live air quality data displayed via world map on the mobile device, which our sensors update every 4 minutes. Access to these tools can better inform the public and provide useful data to municipalities for enabling the opening of schools and businesses, helping smart cities become healthy cities. Excuse me. We're not only used as an air emissions monitoring network. As of late, we have been used as a COVID-19 assistant, trying to fight the spread of COVID-19, particularly particulate matter, or PM. PM is an emission that is so fine and so small that it can go directly into your bloodstream when it's inhaled through your lungs. It can also carry the coronavirus on it, and it's contributed to increasing mortality rates with COVID-19 patients by 8% when they're exposed to it. Because our sensors are so efficient at identifying and measuring the concentrations of particulate matter, they're being used by over 400 local governments throughout Europe and other municipalities throughout Europe and the Arab Peninsula to help prevent exposure to emissions that could be carrying COVID-19. We would like to thank SIBB for giving us this opportunity. And excuse me. Sorry, guys, my computer's freezing up. We would like to thank SIBB for the opportunity to present today, and I look forward to talking to all of you guys later.
Yes, thank you so much, Ray. It all
still
worked
sharing?
out. Thank you for your short pitch. All right, guys, so we made it till the end. It's time for a networking session. At the end, I would like to thank all our great speakers for the contribution to the discussion, and of course our amazing community partners, especially Berlin Partner for Business and Technology and German Accelerator for making this webinar so special and helping us to spread the word. And I would like to provide you with the last few networking tips. So every speaker of today's event will have a table assigned, which will make it easy for you to find the right person and connect. You can obviously switch the table if you click on the other table with the double click. And I do apologize that we didn't have enough time to address all the questions from Q&A section, but that's why we have a networking session right now, so you have a chance to connect, get to know each other, and ask questions. Thank you so much for your attention. I wish you a lovely day, a lovely evening. Stay healthy, and hopefully we'll be able to organize offline events soon. Thank you, and see you in the networking lounge.